Tyler, is that about a wrap on the roof for our new and improved cutaway home?
That's a wrap, Luke. The cutaway house, this roof, it turned out amazing.
Good. I think it looks awesome.
Hey, aren't we doing a whole show today on roofs?
I thought we were doing a grand opening.
Grand opening? Where's the ribbon? Let's go.
No. We got to start the show. This is all about roofs today, guys.
Guys, time out. The network just called. We have to have some pictures of the ribbon cutting. It's non-negotiable.
Ribbon? But guys, we never do anything that's just plain and ordinary. We need to do something bigger than a ribbon cutting.
Yeah. We've got the best grand opening for you guys.
Like what?
We got an idea. I need somebody
Saw the stud.
Saw the stud.
Oh.
Cut the stud.
Hey guys, everybody put your glasses on.
Everybody put glasses
Here
on.
you okay with
All
that?
right. Glasses on.
Let's go for it.
All right, you guys ready?
Grand opening of the new cutaway house. Oh, I love this part.
Oh, yeah!
All right, guys, we got to hurry. We've got to get the roof show started. Let's go.
All right.
Daryl, thank you for letting us mess your.
That was awesome.
Welcome to Between the Studs. We are Granite Ridge Builders, custom builders serving northern Indiana, northwest Ohio, and also parts of southern Michigan. We have been building custom homes for almost 2 decades, and we're really passionate about what we do. So join us today as we explore the processes, the trends, and also tips that characterize today's new home. Thanks for watching.
Roofs are a pretty exciting topic, and a lot of people might not agree, but after the show, I hope you'll agree. I'm going to talk today about Raptor underlayment, and what you can do here is this is right underneath your shingles, and you can see it's going to help shed water there. Whoa! Oh, I'm making a mess, sorry.
Well, Izzy, while you clean that up, what I love to talk about is the slope of the roofs. And we created this nice tool to show people what difference just going from like a 612 to a 712, and we're going to tell you what all that means.
One of my favorite parts is about how the house is just like a human being. It needs to breathe. So we're going to be going into a lot of the venting of the home.
One of the topics I'm going to be discussing today is something that I think gives every home a lot of character, and that's roof shingles.
I like roof anatomy, all the nitty-gritties that actually make up the roof.
And I think it's really important to talk about how the roof type and or slope really depends on the architectural style.
And Kayla, this is probably one of the best investments you've ever made. You can see the brick, you can see the siding, and the most important probably is the roof. We're going to talk about that. But before we do start the show, the word roof has been around for a long time. There's a lot of sayings and cliches. So here's what I think. I think we ought to blow the roof off of the show today. What do you think? Is that good?
That's good.
Well, you know, the young people used to always talk about raising the roof. Maybe that's what
Oh!
No.
I like that one too.
No, the young people need to shout these topics from the rooftops.
I don't think any of you are taking this serious enough. The roof is a very intricate part of the home, and I am about as nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof.
Okay, guys, we got to quit fiddling around, as in Fiddler on the Roof. No, hey, guys, it's time to start the show. Let's go.
Lonnie, that was a good one. I thought that.
I got it.
On the roof.
Thank you.
That was pretty good.
Well, guys, since you guys are talking about the history, I think we need to go back to the color that we used to do a long time ago. If everybody remembers the popular color weathered wood, we used to use this all the time because our houses were typically brown. Right. But with all of these colors that we're doing now, we have the grays and the taupes and all sorts of different colors. The new weathered wood has to be driftwood here. Color plays a really important part, and these grays are awesome and go with everything. You can't go wrong with some of these new color schemes. So have fun talking about the history here.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are we supposed to follow that?
I don't know. But hey, speaking of roofs, that's certainly one thing that has evolved over time. And actually, roofs go back 5,000 years ago to China, where they found evidence that the Chinese were using a clay system or substance as a roof.
And it stayed that way till about 735, and that's when they started actually changing that to more of the thatched roof. And then it was about the year 1000 they switched over to a tile that they were using on the roof.
Right, and it's interesting that in the 12th century that King John from London issued a law that says no more wood, no more thatch roofs because of fires, and so they went to kind of a clay type product.
Lonnie, then in the 19th century is when they started doing mass production of the tiles that they could use for the rooftops.
Right, and speaking of mass production, they actually began to use concrete, which they could produce as a roof structure.
And then in Germany, they started using this green roof structure to try to help give everything a different look and make it a little more environmental.
And that was about the 1970s.
Yes, it was.
And then in the 18th century,
asphalt came on the scene. And they began to mass produce it. It was inexpensive. It became very, very popular, and it continues to be the most popular roof covering used today.
The fun part about all this is when you look back at history and all the different types of roofs that we used, now we're using all of them because of the technology we have.
Right.
We can use the clay, we can use the metal, we can use pretty much anything somebody wants in today's world.
It's exciting. We got an exciting show today as we explore this subject.
We have so many different
roofs.
things we can talk about with this.
Well, look, in the previous segment, we talked about roof history. Let's go a little further and talk about roof anatomy. You know, I notice in our area, when these guys are framing these houses, there's all kinds of angles. It seems complicated. Somebody's got to cut all those things. Let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah, our framers truly are, I mean, they're mathematics. They can go in there, they can cut those angles. And one of my favorite parts is walking up to a job site that's been freshly framed and walking up and just looking at that roof structure, because it is truly fascinating how all these angles come together, how far they can span, that everything fits nice and tight, and it gives it that aesthetic look from the curb that really looks sharp.
And I notice that when they are doing it, they don't say, hey, give me a piece of wood. They've got actual names for some of these parts.
Yeah, and probably the most common one is a rafter.
Okay.
And there's one that's called a common rafter, and that's usually what makes up the bulk of the slope of that roof. So when you're standing on the curb looking up at, most of what you're going to see is the common rafter. Now, the common rafter ties down onto that top plate, and there's a special area there that we call the bird's mouth that the framers will notch, and it will sit down on that top plate, giving it that wall to roof connection.
I also heard somebody call for Jack to come up on the roof. What was that?
Yeah, there's jack rafters, just like in our wall framing. We've talked about that in previous episodes. There's jack studs, there's jack rafters. So anytime any of those common rafters need cut down, typically that's going to be called a jack rafter. So maybe it's tying into one of the other slopes and it needs cut down from its original length.
So we have to give our framers a lot of credit. They really know what they're doing when it comes to putting all these angles and pieces together to create this beautiful roof.
Yeah. Now there's also valley rafters and hip rafters.
Okay.
And they're kind of the inverse opposite of each other. And the valley rafter, think of anything, like a valley, something down. So when two slopes are coming together and creating that valley, that's where you're going to find those valley rafters.
And that comes down at a certain angle, and then it has to be angled out so that snow and ice will shed off.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And they do a lot of special parts in that valley to make sure that it's watertight. But then there's the hip rafter. Okay. And the hip rafter protrudes out, just like your hips do, Lonnie. They kind of stick out
a little
there.
bit.
Yeah. So a hip rafter is what sticks out. So that's the inverse of that. And that's, again, where maybe if you have a hip on a roof, so we talk about different types. There's gable roofs, hip roofs. That's where those two come together, and they're jutting out. They kind of create a little triangle up there.
Okay, so we put all these pieces together. We create this roof frame. What do we put on top of the rafter or the frame?
Well, before we get to that part, all those rafters have to tie to one beam, and that's called our ridge beam.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we talk about venting. That's where the ridge comes in there. But all those come together, and that very tip point of the roof is our ridge.
And a lot of times those are pretty big pieces of wood.
Yes, yeah. It takes quite a few men to get that up there. So then, once we're done with that, then we put that on top of the roof, and that's our sheathing.
Our sheathing. And I know that sheathing has changed over the years. We used to say, I got to have 1/2 inch or even 3/4 inch plywood up there. But we've kind of gone away from plywood, haven't we? For good reason.
Yeah, we've switched to OSB. OSB tends to expand and contract a little bit less than plywood because there's a bunch of tiny pieces of wood as opposed to large sheets of wood. So they expand and contract a little less than plywood, which helps because anytime you have expansion and contraction and we put those roof shingles on it, they'll pucker up, and we don't want that.
Okay, yeah, I know that people over the course of time when they've replaced their roof, they say, oh man, look at that plywood. It actually has separated, and that's a problem.
Yep.
This stuff doesn't separate nearly as quick.
Right, and another important component between those sheets of sheathing are these little clips here. And we call them H-clips.
They look like H's.
They do. They look like H's. And this is something that we've changed here recently. We used to use metal. Now we've switched to plastic. You may think, well, why would you switch from metal to plastic? But we've found, because these have a little bit of a tapered edge, when they put these pieces together, this will expand out, and it makes sure that there's that separation between each piece of sheathing.
Okay,
because
that's important,
yes,
because you can go look up and see some daylight sometimes. Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah,
that's actually good.
That's good. That's a sign of a good framer, because if that spacing is in there, then when these expand and contract, you're not going to get two pieces of wood that have nowhere to go, and then they pucker up. And you'll see that in the right light. When the sun's shining over that roof or the frost on it, you'll see, you can almost make out where every piece of sheathing is because they didn't get their spacing right.
And then over this comes the underlayment and then the shingle, and that's what makes up a very good roof that may last a lifetime in our area.
Now, Izzy, most people can see the shingle on the outside of the house. They see the sheeting when they're up in the attic, but they don't realize there's a very important piece when it comes to the roof that's in between the shingle and that sheathing, and that's the underlayment.
Yeah, I definitely agree. As an average consumer, most of us really look at this, and this is all we think about. You see the shingles, and that's really all you think that's up there. But there's so much more involved here. Let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah, and really the purpose of the underlayment is just an additional protective layer from any water that's going to get potentially underneath the shingle. As you can see, the shingle here is only yay wide, and we overlap them. But if you get a really driving rain, there is some potential to have water get in. That's where the underlayment comes in. So let's go ahead and throw the shingle aside, and I have 3 different types of underlayment stacked here. And the first one that I want to talk about is felt.
I agree. I felt it. No, but seriously, what is this for?
All right, so felt we don't use on our houses, but 15 years ago, every roof that was going on had felt underneath it. Now, felt, the way that it's manufactured is simply just paper that is soaked in asphalt. It tears very easily, just like paper would. If it gets rained on, it starts to crumple up. And then it's also very slick. And so roofers had a tendency to over-fasten this. So they would put thousands of fasteners in this because they didn't want it slipping underneath their foot.
Yeah.
So we found a better product than this. So like I said, we don't use this anymore.
Yeah.
But the product we are using, and you mentioned in the opening, is Raptor.
Yes.
Now this is a synthetic roofing underlayment, which means you can see on the back side there it's woven together. Very difficult to tear and also very sticky to your feet. So roofers, they don't have the tendency to feel like it's going to slip from underneath them, so they only put the minimum number of fasteners in, which is just area where potentially water could come through.
Yeah, and this is waterproof now, right?
Yes, very
That's what we were
waterproof.
showing
So
before.
we'll hold that up. You pour some water on there, and other than it leaking on the back side there, it does not leak through.
Yeah, it doesn't go through at all.
This is what we're talking about, where that additional protective layer. Now this doesn't do anything with the UV. It's not going to help with wind. It's not going to help with the hail. But if any water were to get underneath that shingle, this is where this takes over and makes sure that it finds its way to the outside of the house, not penetrating to the inside.
Yeah.
Now I mentioned I have 3. This one we do use, and this is, so we had our felt, which was a paper underlayment. Then we had our synthetic roofing underlayment. This is what's called a rubberized underlayment. And it's got a backside here where you can peel this off. It's sticky. You can stick it right to the sheathing. And now this is called Ice and Water Shield, and you'll find that on your Granite Ridge homes in the first 3 foot of that roof, because that's the area most susceptible to ice and water, or ice dams.
Yeah. Well, that definitely makes sense. Is there any other place that you can find this on our roof?
Yeah, the valleys. Anywhere where we got 2 roofs coming together and it kind of creates that valley, they're going to put that ice and water there too. And then if we ever have a low slope, which Kayla and I talked about low slopes, any low slope applications, we put the ice and water over the entire sheathing of that deck as an additional layer because there's not as much slope to have that water run off.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so as you can see, a very, very important part, and this is critical to a good roof installation because without this, there is some additional potential to have water come into the house.
There's a lot going on underneath the shingles that you may not have known about, and this is a great definition for it.
Luke, we get to talk about slopes and architectural styles when it comes to roofs, and I think there's a misnomer out there, the slope versus pitch, and what are the differences of some of those before we get started?
Yeah, a lot of people use those terms interchangeably, but that's not true, and most of our viewers and us, we talk about slope. Now, my framers out on the job site, they talk about pitch, because they're using a framing square like this to try to figure out what kind of angles they need, and they need to take into account the pitch, which the pitch goes the entire span of that roof, where slope is just talking about rise over run.
So the pitch is the entire roof structure, and the slope is just part of it, pretty much.
Right, so when I mentioned rise over run, so you'll hear things like 412 slope, 612 slope, 1212 slope, it can go on. But we created a nice little tool here for people to visualize what that means. So we say rise over run. So if we say 412, then you move the bar here to where it says 4 on the framing square. And then we've already got this bolted in here. So this is always at 12. So you can see this would be a 412 slope. 4 up, 12 over.
Okay, now 4 is going to be, I mean, you can start as much as 1 or 0, and so 4 is going to be a little bit on the lower scale, correct?
Yeah, so obviously a 0 to 12 would just be a flat roof. Now there are 3 different categories. There's a low slope roof, a moderate or a standard slope roof, or a steep slope roof. And I think we're going to show what that looks like on the scale here, and then we're going to talk about some of the styles that are identified by those types of slopes.
Perfect, because there are several styles that you can definitely tell it's that time period based on the slope of the roof.
Yeah, so let's start with that low slope. We mentioned 412, so it'd be anything 412 or lower. Now you have to be careful in Indiana because if it's 412 or lower, the asphalt shingles, we need to do some extra things with those, and like with the underlayment, we have to do ice and water shield over the whole roof in order to make sure we don't get any leaks.
Okay, so in this area, we talk about the low slope roof. You're going to see that in architectural design of the prairie style, where you have the long horizontal lines or more of the hip roofs. You're going to see that in craftsman style, which is a really popular one in a lot of subdivisions here with that arts and crafts. You can recognize that from a lot of different decoration on it, brackets and things like that. Another one that we see the low sloped roof would be a Greek Revival house. So that's something that you can identify that style with, or the Italianate. You know, Italianate has, again, a little bit more ornamentation and a low slope because you have more ornamentation on the house. So you don't need the roof to really stand out and be the focal point. The last one that you'll identify low with that is incredibly popular right now is definitely the modern. So all sorts of modern styles going on in Fort Wayne, and you can identify those with low slopes.
Yeah, now we mentioned the slopes. Let's a lot of people understand degrees. So a 412 would be about an 18.5 degree slope.
Okay.
Now we talked about moderate and standard. Moderate will go from 412 up to a 2112, which my wood rail doesn't go that far, but it's about right here. So you can see that'd be a pretty, what we would consider steep, but it's still in that moderate or standard, and that would be about a 60 degree slope. Just for reference, an 1812 would be a 45 degree. Most people know that's half a 90, 45 degree slope there.
Okay, so the moderate, you're going to be identifying that style. A lot of the traditional homes that you see around Fort Wayne that were done in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you can also see that as a part of the architectural styles and history of Georgian and colonial, which we have talked about in the past recent shows, where you see again, a lot of windows and shutters in the more symmetrical style houses. With the moderate slope, it's one of those architectural styles that, again, the roof is there to enhance the style and not necessarily be the focal point, as opposed to the steep sloped roofs. That's where the steep slope is going to be the focal point.
Yeah, and would it be safe to say that the majority of our homes that we build today fall in that moderate slope?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, I know you say color is the most important thing with roof, but I would argue that slope is, because you can make it where if the slope is too steep, you'll see too much roof from the curb.
Absolutely.
And that, like you said, that'll be the focal point. So now switching to that steep slope, so that would be anything over that 60 degrees, over that 2112. What are some architectural styles that we attach to that?
You know, I think you can identify the Tudor style as being a steep roof, and the Tudor is the house you see some more stucco and trim work that's stained. That's in several houses around Fort Wayne. The Gothic style, we have a couple of those around. You also have the Queen Anne, where you have usually that octagonal porch. That roof on top of those porches tend to be a little bit steeper, and then as well as the mansard roof. So a mansard roof would be, if you've ever been to Disney and you're walking into Magic Kingdom, you'll definitely recognize that mansard roof.
Yeah, and those are darn close to 90 degrees. Yeah. Those almost look like walls with shingles on it, don't they?
I definitely won't get up on those.
Yeah, so it's really important to understand how slope ties in with the style, and it's one of those things, and we have this here at our showroom, so anybody wants to come in and play with this, more than welcome to come in, and we'll explain to you how that slope can play into your new house.
Lonnie, we just got done seeing how slope defines the form, and more importantly, might even define the architectural style. You and I are going to make a case how the shape of a roof defines the architectural style and probably identifies a roof more than anything will do. So why don't you give them the two most basic shapes that they're always going to see on a roof around our area.
Okay, Tony. Well, first of all, there is the gable roof, and that's basically just two slopes coming up to a point. And so you got these 2 points, and then on this part of the roof would be siding typically. Yeah. Now, the hip roof is when you take that gable and you just kind of slope it in. And so you eliminate the siding portion and you replace it with a shingle. And between the gable and the hip, it probably represents 80% of the roof styles and forms you're going to see in our area.
I would agree. Probably the third most important, and the one you're going to see the most, would be a shed roof. And that's more of a monopitch. Why don't you define that?
Right,
one?
yeah, and that's just a single slope. And it plays very, very well into like the craftsman style home and some of those styles that are very popular today. But
Modern.
It's just simply, modern, for example, just a single slope. And as long as you slope it at least 412 or 512, it sheds water and snow and things very well, very beautiful.
And we got a great example of that shed roof style that we just got done building a couple weeks ago.
Right.
So why don't you define some other ones that we might see around us?
Well, there's one that I've been called around the office, and that's the jerkin head, which is an interesting interesting roof style.
Yep, it's called a clip gable. Also, it is a gable on a hip, so you'll see that a lot. Now, you've also seen something called a Dutch gable, and that's where you might see a little bit less roof, a little bit more siding, and we call that a Dutch roof style.
Yes, and it's become very popular in a lot of different styles of homes that we've been building recently in our area.
Okay, we live in Indiana. We have to talk about our barns.
Okay.
So what kind of roof styles have you seen on a lot of barns in our area?
Well, again, you know, the gable roof style is probably the most common.
Yep.
We see that all over the place. But then it changed as farmers began to think about more space that they needed for their hay. And so the gable roof became very popular on a barn.
And that's got what, 2 sheds on it, or two
slopes,
on
right?
the side.
2 slopes on each side, right, to give more space for the hay.
Okay, another one that you're going to see in Indiana, and we've got the most style, but it's becoming extinct. It's called the barrel roof style.
Right.
You'll see a lot of that in our area.
Very simple, just an arch style roof system. I don't know how they ever shingled it, but anyway, it's very beautiful.
And if you see one, like I said, take a picture, because they're becoming extinct around our area, but we do have more in our area than anybody. Now, let's talk about churches. Everybody defines churches with the roof styles. What do we see there?
There are all kinds of styles that are found on our churches throughout the world. I lived in Eastern Europe for a while, and I saw the spiral, for example, or the spire rather, which is a huge kind of a conical form system that rises up to heaven, you might say. And in Fort Wayne, we've got a lot of examples of spire roofs.
We really do, and a lot of people might recognize that because just recently, Notre Dame, they had a fire, and that's what everybody's talking about, is that amazingly beautiful spire came tumbling down.
Right.
So you're going to see on the Gothic style, you're going to see a lot of steep roofs. You're going to see conical. You're going to see hexagon style roofs. Now, you were a missionary over in Europe, in Russia, for about 8 years. What kind of roof styles did you see there?
There were onion domes in almost every major city in Russia because of the Orthodox Church, and that's what depicted or characterized the
I think
church.
one of those are one of the most unusual styles. Now, you said there's also something over in Eastern Europe that you've seen a lot of called rhombic.
The rhombic, which is an interesting roof. It's hard to explain, but it's different angles coming together to make a very beautiful roof system that just draws attention to itself.
Okay, we got one last one that you might even see on barns, and that's called a clear story. Now, what's a clear story window?
Yeah, a clear story window is a window that is typically above eye level. You have to look up to see it.
Yep.
And it's in an open area, and it provides passive light coming in.
Yeah.
Usually you don't open it because you can't get to it. Hard to clean, but it's a beautiful place for passive light.
And I've seen a lot of those now on barns. Here's a picture of one. I've also seen them on a lot of pavilions. That's called a clear story roof. So I think the audience is going to find this fascinating. There are so many different types of roofs, aren't there?
So just as a man or a woman might have 8 or 10 or 15 different caps in their closet they wear from time to time, our homes and our buildings in our area also have a multitude of hats and caps that help to characterize that home and draw attention to a beautiful building or home in our area of the world.
Now, Tyler, up to this point in the show, we've talked a lot about all the things underneath the roof, like the framing structure, the underlayment, the slopes, but the first layer of defense is the asphalt shingle itself. So let's get into that a little bit.
Sure. So when we're talking about shingles, I'm really excited, Luke, because one of our standards here at Granite Ridge Builders is we use a lifetime warranty dimensional shingle through Certainty. We use these landmark dimensional shingles, and I think it's really important that our viewers at home know kind of how these shingles are made, or we're going to talk about the makeup of those shingles.
Yeah, I had the luxury of going to one of those Certainty plants, and I was fascinated to see how this is actually made. So really it starts with a fiberglass mat, and I don't have that here, but then that fiberglass mat gets coated on both sides with asphalt, and that's what gives it the waterproof properties. So it looks similar to this. This is felt, but it's the same type of process. And then it starts with that. So you got the fiberglass mat, then you got 2 layers of asphalt, which on both sides of it. Then what it does is, and we're going to go to the shingle now, they put all of this rock on it, and it really is rock. It starts off like limestone, same limestone that we put in our concrete. They crush it up, they give it its color, and they put a ceramic coating on it.
So Luke, we're talking about some of these rocks, but why don't we tell the viewers at home what some of the advantages of those rocks in the surface of the shingle play a part in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that gives it the UV protection, so it protects the underlayment there from the sun, and then also helps with wind that gives it the weight of the shingle. It helps with the water, shutting that water off. So that rock, I mean, obviously we know rock is a very, very tough product. So we're covering that entire shingle and your roof with rock, and it gives it that protection.
That's awesome. And another thing I love, Luke, which I'm going to grab here, are these copper granules. So these copper granules that are pretty much put into the surface of these shingles play a very critical role in algae formation on the surface of a roof shingle. So a lot of you may be driving down the road, you'll see the north side of the shingles of a house and see that they've got those black streaks. Those black streaks are actually from algae, but these copper granules that are put into these certainteed shingles help fight that. And it comes with a 10-year streak fighter warranty to help minimize that on the surface of the shingle.
Yeah, and the way they were able to figure that out, in the old houses, they had copper flashing, they had copper around their fireplaces, and they noticed those black streaks never showed up underneath that because the rain would pick up that copper and wash it away. So they added that to the shingles, and we've eliminated those black streaks. But I want to get back to the layers. So we mentioned there's the fiberglass mat, the 2 layers of asphalt, then you got a sand layer on the back side of this that gives it some rigidity, then the rock layer, so that's 5 layers right there in itself. Then on this shingle, like you mentioned, we're using the landmark and it's dimensional, so you can see it's got a second layer on it. So in some areas of this shingle, there are 10 layers, and that gives it that huge protection. Again, that's our first layer of protection, and we're really coating that roof with a very heavy-duty product.
Now, when we're talking about layers, Luke, too, I mean, I would imagine with all these layers, it gives it some weight and also helps with wind blow-offs. And you're going to talk a little bit about the wind blow-off warranty that comes with these shingles.
Yep, so 110 mile per hour is what these are rated for. And it does give it a lot of extra weight with that double layer. So we really, once this is sealed down and there's a seal strip on the back of this, we virtually have no blow-offs. And really, asphalt shingles, you'll see it predominantly in our area, but there are some other options. Asphalt, it's cost effective and it's lifetime warranty, but there's metal roof, for example.
That's right, Luke. So when we're talking about metal roofs, we're seeing those a lot nowadays with different types of styles, architectural styles of homes. So we're seeing metal roofs incorporated into like those modern farmhouses that we've seen. People are using certain metal roofing on portions of their home, whether it be dormers or different parts of the shed roofs, on certain houses. And another type of material that we see in roofs too are cedar shake.
Yeah, cedar shake. There's also slate. There's tile. Those are ones we don't get into too often. Probably 95% asphalt shingle, probably 5% metal roofing, and then every once in a while we'll get some of those other in our area.
Luke, we've talked a lot about shingles today, and when we talk about the overall cost of a home, shingles and the roof account for 3% of the overall cost. It's such a critical component when coming to build your house, and it really protects everything from overhead or even between the studs.
Oh, you mean
Me?
No.
You?
No. Or maybe the studs of the house.
Maybe the studs of the house, yes.
So Kayla, with all these new window colors, it's possible to match the windows to the roof or the roof to the windows?
Potentially it could be. I think black and bronzes are so popular right now that you could have your roof be a great accent and a statement piece, or you could have your roof blend in and be a nice compromise to everything else going on too.
And this kind of works, huh?
It absolutely does. There's so many great roof color options that could go with a lot of different styles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, one of my favorite segments today, I think, is when Luke was talking about the different angles and different slopes on the roof.
Yeah, it's such a simple tool, but it really lets people understand the importance of that slope.
It really does. I hope you found this interesting today. We found it fascinating also. Kayla, would you go ahead and close for us?
Thanks so much for watching today. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do so well, please visit the website, give us a call, or even better yet, come in the front door. We'd love to talk to you about what kind of roof is going to be on your new dream home.
Okay, I think you got a really mess to clean up. You got a lot of water.
It's over. I didn't see it. Not on colors, but yeah, I understand that. Not on the colors.